rats the size of cats, poison gas attacks, and not enough supplies. Life in the trenches during World War I was absolutely hellish. Hey there, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to find out what life was like in the trenches. It was muddy, cold, and damp, a perfect place for rats to live. And these weren't your ordinary rats. They were huge. Coming in at around 20 inches long, they were most likely the largest rats in the world. They lived among the soldiers, feasting on their supplies, and even stealing their food right out of their hands. These big guys would also steal things of sentimental value, like jewelry from the dead, which they would then hoard in their nests. Even though the rats were big and scary, the soldiers seemed to develop a strange tolerance for them. It was just another thing that they had to deal with during the war. If the rats didn't scare you enough, this next thing probably will. The soldiers didn't just live among rats, but also corpses. There was no other way to put it. They were living in a sea of death. All around them, people had died, and sometimes you could uneven find a place to dig a new trench because the ground was too hard. This is when the soldiers had to start digging in the old ones, meaning that they were literally digging for their own survival. They had to be careful, though, because one wrong move could mean getting injured or killed. And if you got injured, you would be stuck in no man's land with the rats, the disease, and the flies. The flies carried diseases such as cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. So if you got bitten by one of those flies and then scratched the bite, you might get one of those diseases. If that happened, you would have to go to the field hospital where you would be treated and hopefully survive. But before you got to the hospital, you would have to deal with the lice. They would crawl all over your body and bite you, making you itch. You would try to get rid of them, but no matter what you did, they always came back. So basically, you would have to live with the rats, the disease, the flies, and the lice. Oh yeah, and don't forget the fear. You would have to live in fear every day, knowing that you might get killed at any moment. That's why it was so important for the soldiers to have things to take their mind off of what was happening. Things like letters from home, games, and books helped a lot, but the one thing that probably helped them the most was their fellow soldiers. The bonds that they created with each other were unbreakable, helping them overcome many of the horrors that they witnessed. Poison gas was another thing that the soldiers had to deal with. Attacks could happen at any time. The most common type of gas used was mustard gas, which could burn your entire body in a matter of minutes. If you were attacked, you would try to put on your gas mask, but sometimes they wouldn't work, leaving you defenseless. If you couldn't put on your gas mask, or if your mask didn't work, you would either go blind or suffocate, or both. The constant shelling of the enemy also had a negative effect on the soldiers' mental health. It caused something called shell shock. We know it as PTSD. In movies about World War I, you often see a soldier getting hit by a shell and then falling down with a blank expression on his face. That is supposed to show shell shock. But it wasn't only the explosion that caused this. It was also the constant fear of being blown up. So we've talked about rats, gas, blindness, death, fear. What else did the soldiers have to deal with? How about terrible food? It was often moldy and tasted bad. The main dish was usually meat, but it could be anything from a cat to a dog. Along with your meat, you would get some bread and a little bit of cheese. But overall, it wasn't very filling, so most of the soldiers lost a lot of weight. There were also the potatoes, which were usually undercooked. And let's not forget the beer. The soldiers drank a lot of beer, especially the British ones. They drank it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. All of this sounds terrible, so it's no wonder the soldiers wrote scary letters home. They wrote about how they constantly felt the urge to run away, how they had seen so much death, and how they never wanted to go back to the trenches. But even though they were scared, they still had each other. They played cards, they sang songs, and they made jokes, even though most of the time, those jokes were pretty dark. One example is, why did the German laugh when he saw the English trenches? Because he saw our platoon, and he thought they were having a bath. Pretty dark, huh? But this is what the soldiers needed to do to keep their minds off of what was happening. They needed a way to cope with the horror that surrounded them every day.